Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Extraordinary Family Life Podcast. We're your hosts, Greg and Rachel Dennings. And today we are excited, and I at least am a little bit concerned, because this topic has the potential to be misunderstood. And we don't want to be misunderstood. We want to be able to speak openly and plainly without being misunderstood.
Which in some ways is not possible,
Right.
I think, because misunderstanding is
Part
an
of the human
essential
experience.
element of the human experience
Yeah.
and of conversation in general. Like
Yep.
misunderstanding happens.
Just because of the way we define words. So when we say something like church, we all have a specific definition for church and gospel, God. Even you say, well, this is God, and each has a different kind of meaning and feeling they attach to that.
Well,
And
it's kind of like the iconic Jordan Peterson when people say, "Do you believe in God?" And he's like, "It depends on what you mean by believe and what you mean by God."
exactly,
right?
exactly.
And you sometimes think you're being ridiculous, but I
It's
think
true.
he's really put his finger on it.
Yeah.
Where that is maybe some of the problems are coming from that people are running into is because I might define believe differently than you define believe, and I might define God differently than you define God,
Yep.
and we each have this image in our minds of what it means to us. And so, we have to be able to, I think, identify and give definitions to those types of words so that we know exactly what we're talking about.
And the same is true with spirituality and religion and religious practices and a relationship with God, all those things. The additional complexity comes with what we can refer to as sacred cows that we each get
Well, the
attached
reference-
emotionally and mentally to certain things and
Certain ideas.
and they become so there's
Untouchable.
there's sacred things that you're like, hey, that's sacred and special and it ought to be treated that way, and I totally agree. Then there's certain things that they become untouchable, or it's easy for all of us to become blinded by something because we're so emotionally attached to it, or we put so much meaning on or whatever that like, hey, no, you never talk about that. You never question whether it's being done well or not. It's like it's untouchable.
Right.
And it's the sacred cow.
Yeah, so the idea comes from, in India, they literally have sacred cows, and the cows, we lived in India for 5 months, and they just wander around through the streets, they eat the garbage, but they're sacred, and they're not allowed to be interfered with.
They're not allowed to
killed.
be treated like cattle.
But I think, was it someone who wrote a marketing book about it or something?
Yeah,
And
killing sacred cows.
Sacred cows.
Yeah.
And, his whole point was there are ideas and beliefs that we have that we think they're sacred in that, like you were saying, we don't let anyone touch them or attack them or criticize them or examine them because, no, that's just off limits.
Yep.
And I think especially as we get into this discussion about religion and church, I know I had a whole bunch of sacred cows, and I know many people have sacred cows where it's just this certain idea that, like, you're not allowed to examine it.
Right.
You're not allowed to question it. You're not allowed to doubt it because that feels like you're killing this sacred cow.
Right.
And at least in my own journey, I found that going through that process is very, I would actually say it's faith building, even though it initially feels very terrifying and like
It's threatening.
threatening
Yeah.
to faith. It feels like you're killing faith.
Yep.
But really, if you really study philosophy and religion and psychology, I think it's that process of doubting, questioning, killing sacred cows that actually allows us to build and strengthen a real deep abiding faith.
But only, and I want to emphasize this with as much emphasis as I can, only if we're willing to walk the entire labyrinth. Only if we're willing to go all the way. If I just step back and start pointing fingers and criticizing and like, oh, that's not very good and that's not very good, and then I just walk away off into the field, whatever, I go walk into the wilderness. I missed it.
It's not helpful.
It's not helpful at all.
It's criticism that's not, it's not purposeful. It's not intentional to any end. It's
Exactly.
just,
But if I'm willing to examine and question and walk the whole circle, then that actually strengthens faith.
Right. And you're referring to, we love to refer to the labyrinth specifically the Chartreuse labyrinth in France, which is on the floor of a cathedral, where to arrive at the center of the labyrinth, you have to walk the entire thing. A labyrinth is different than a maze. A maze has dead ends, and it takes you places you don't want to go, and it doesn't lead to anywhere specific, where a labyrinth begins in one place and ends in another, but you walk the entire distance. So you go north, south, east, west, up and down until you reach the center. And that, to me, is this process that I'm describing, or I'm talking about.
That has to be the process of faith.
Yeah. You walk the labyrinth, you ask all the questions, you go into the dark, scary places, you shine light in the corners. That's the process of building faith. But I think if we continue to live in this state of mind where we don't question, we're not willing to kill the sacred cows, we're not willing to ask the hard questions, then we remain in one little corner of the labyrinth thinking, no, this is it.
This is it.
This is the whole thing.
Yeah,
the whole
exactly.
truth is right here in this corner. And we're like, no, there's a whole labyrinth you still haven't walked. And the truth is actually found in the center, not over here on the outskirts.
Right. But the truth has to encompass all of the outskirts.
Yeah.
All of them. Mm-hmm. And so we simultaneously have to be willing to look outside and look inside. Mm-hmm. Now, I was with you. I had an entire herd of sacred cows that I held sacred and protected. And I was admittedly very, very narrow in my scope of education and understanding. I looked at one source of all truth. And I think maybe we'll touch on that no organization, however great, has a monopoly on truth, period. And so as we examine truth and we search for truth, we get expansion.
Yeah.
And it strengthens core beliefs, fortifies them, makes them better, but also expands the whole circle of belief. And I would say, ultimately, any gospel encompasses all truth.
Right.
And that's like, we get so threatened, like, yeah, but that person or that organization said it, so it can't be true. Like, well, truth is truth. It's great. And I don't think any person or any organization has all truth. And so
I think a lot of them have truth and have lots of truth.
yes, and we ought to be
And
learning
some have
from
more
them
truth
all.
than others, per
Agreed.
se,
I would agree.
But no one has all of the truth.
Right. And so then on a journey of deep spiritual growth, in this case for this conversation, and becoming a whole developed being, which I think is the purpose of life, then we ought to be voraciously seeking truth anywhere and everywhere. Like, I'm going out looking for truth. And I'm going to expand and grow and come across new things. But I have to be willing to question.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of ties into what it is we want to talk about today, because essentially we want to talk about why are people leaving the church? And when we talk about the church, especially in this instance...
I want to go way more than that, but...
Okay, but in this case, when we're talking about the church, I love the definition given by Eric Metaxas in his book, A Letter to the American Church.
Which you all should read.
Yeah, everyone
It
should
is
read
phenomenal.
that. It's a phenomenal book. But his definition was, you are a member of the American Church if you are a Christian in the United States.
Yep.
That was specifically his definition. I would expand that to, in this case, a Christian anywhere in the world, but also, and I think we'll touch on this.
So I guess to clarify on that, the Christian church then, this is a simple definition. The Christian church is anyone who believes in Christ. If you believe in Christ, then you belong to Christ's church.
Right.
In the big,
Whether or
broad
not you go to
definition.
A church, no matter which church you belong to, that's his big, broad definition. I think we are going to touch on, at least today, that what we're discussing not only applies to Christianity, but we've also seen it in Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam. Like, we've seen it in a lot of places around the world, because I feel it's a global phenomenon that's happening worldwide, of this kind of move away from religion, at least an organized religion in a way. Although, really, in places like Mongolia or Turkey or Morocco, I don't know if you ever officially leave Islam. Like, I feel like that's always it's just a part of your culture. It's just a part of everything. So it's always there. But we have seen it being practiced in different ways over, like, it's changing. The whole culture of the next generation is changing.
Right. I think you meant
Essentially.
Morocco, not Mongolia, because.
Well, I meant Mongolia as far as Buddhism
Oh, okay. Yeah.
and
Okay.
those practices.
Yep. So part of this discussion is like there's a mass exodus out of churches,
Yeah.
but and that's maybe there's a big part of this conversation. I definitely want to talk about how the church is failing to rise up to its potential.
Which, exactly in my mind, is the reason. Like, if we could give the short definition of why people are leaving the church, that would be it.
Yep.
Churches are failing
Yep.
to meet the needs of their members, and that's why people are leaving them. Which, okay, I said because it ties into what you're saying, which is essentially what you had been saying right before that, is essentially people are looking for truth.
And need it.
They want truth.
Yeah.
Human beings want truth. They want to understand the truth.
Yep.
And so they're seeking it. But I think when they begin to seek it in their own religion and they're not finding the answers there, they start looking elsewhere, which is normal and natural. Because as truth-seeking beings, we are going to search for truth wherever we can find it.
Yep.
And that is a good and healthy thing. Now, it can also become a destructive thing because we have seen that as a destructive force in the lives of individuals and families. So it seems frightening because, yeah, it is potentially frightening. But if done in the right way, if you walk that labyrinth, and if you don't throw out things too quickly, you find that it's actually grounding and centering, and it helps you to solidify your faith and to have a deeper understanding about why religions exist in the first place, like what their purpose is and why they are necessary and why they have a role to play in the foundation of society. You begin to see that as you walk this journey. But again, back to the reason of why people are leaving the church, it's because they're not finding the answers they're looking for there.
Exactly.
And they're not able to have the conversations they need or want to be able to find those answers.
Another way to say that is they're not having their needs met. Right? Like we talk about all the time in relationships. Like if your needs aren't being met with parenting, the children's needs aren't being met, if the spouse's needs aren't being met, there's going to be trouble.
Exactly.
And then in Exodus, right, things are going to fall apart. And the same is true with this kind of journey. It's like if the needs aren't being met spiritually, specifically spiritually,
but socially,
intellectually,
definitely.
Yeah. If it's not happening, then there's trouble and mediocrity, and then falling
even just
away.
Boredom.
Yeah.
Or a lack of stimulation or challenge or interest.
Yeah. So today, this episode's going to sound, at least from my side, it's going to sound quite critical of churches and religion. But I want to emphasize as boldly as I can, I believe religion is a good thing. Mm-hmm. In spite of the ugly, ugly history that religion has, an organized religion. And I've had many conversations with people who just abhor organized religion because of the negative side effects of it, which is true. Mm-hmm. It's true. It can have such an ugly side effect, and it can become so divisive, and so I don't know. There's a lot of trouble that comes with it. In spite of that, I wholeheartedly believe it's a good thing, and it's a foundation for a lot of people, and for many, many, many people, it brings so much goodness into their lives that they wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah, right.
And it becomes a great resource, an extended family. I mean, so many good things. But today, in the same mindset and that we approach almost everything is like, let's be willing to question it and always ask, is there a better way?
Right.
How can this be done better? Where is it failing? And we really started doing that together with how we were going to educate our children.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how we were going to live our lives. I mean, that's how our journey started, of course, because we wanted
Well,
to...
but it started with education.
True, you're right,
Lifestyle was years later because that was even another big leap.
Right.
But it started with education. It was like, okay, let's look at what's available with education. And we saw the institutions and we started looking at the results.
Because at the time you were actually working in the
Inside,
public education
exactly.
system.
I'd worked in private education and public education, and I was just looking around, just paying attention. I was willing to be aware and honest at the results, because results don't lie. That's how we can effectively judge or, quote, attack sacred cows, is say, look, results don't lie. So if you're like, I love this institution, I love it, I love it, I love it, it's amazing, I went through it, and you're like, yeah, but you're not willing to honestly look at the results.
Yeah.
And when you stop and just total gut check, reality check of like, look at the results, you're like, yeah.
Without protecting the sacred cows.
Yep. They're dismal. They're horrible. And so the public school system, which honestly is just a government school system, sucks. It is horrendous.
Now, okay, but because we do want to argue to both points, it does provide a necessary safety net for many people.
Yep.
And that's the point of it.
What's a safety net for all people, for society?
Right. It's a safety net so that even if the poorest person in the country did nothing, or in the world,
at least
their child would at least have this basic education.
Yep,
it's a safety net. That's why it's there. And it's a good thing. We need it.
Yep.
But I think in the context of this discussion,
as bad as it is, I would never say, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Abolish it because it's so bad. I would never, ever, ever say that.
But in the context of this discussion, what we're trying to say is that for people who want better outcomes than you would get in the public school system, you have to pursue different pathways.
Yep, exactly.
That's what it's about. It's not get rid of the school, and it's also not get rid of the religion. It's saying, hey, wait a second, I want better and different outcomes. I have to take a different path. That's there for society, for safety. It's needed, it's necessary, but it doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to follow that path, right? And that's where we started with homeschooling, because we thought we want different outcomes. We want different outcomes. We want better outcomes than we're seeing in the public school system, so we're going to pursue that different pathway.
And as arrogant as it might sound, we wholeheartedly believe that because of the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness inside these big
large organizations,
we believed we could do it more effectively and more efficiently, which has proved to be true.
Yes.
And so it can be done. And again, back to this quest of striving to become your very best self. If you genuinely are on a journey to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, then of necessity, just the very nature of growth, you're going to outgrow certain things.
Right.
You're going to move past them. And that's important. You can't be like, well, no, junior high is the best. We're staying there because it was a good experience. Like, well, at some point, you've got to outgrow that. Rachel's alarms are going off. So I think we'll circle back to the outgrow things because it's important. Okay, and there's a foundation, there's a base, right? So we're talking about questioning organizations, saying, oh, is there a better way to do this? And being willing, heaven forbid, to question the sacred cow.
Which, for both of us starting out, public school was a sacred cow. I went to public school, you did, you went to college, you were a public school teacher. So that idea initially was crazy.
Well, I went through the whole thing, and I loved going to university. I genuinely loved going to university, and I learned so much. I was out on my own at 16, so going to high school and doing the work, I learned a lot.
Right.
And I liked learning. I loved learning, and so I was like, oh, this is great. And then I wanted to be a teacher because of what education can do. It can transform lives, and so I'm in it. This is the best.
Right.
And education is transformation. But then you have to start questioning the sacred cow of, wait a minute, are these schools actually delivering education?
Well,
and today we're asking, are churches really delivering on spiritual promises?
But I think that this is also a good analogy because we're also not saying there was no value there. We're not saying that it didn't provide a foundation for your life. It did those things. Yep. But what we are saying is that at some point you realized, okay, good, it produced these outcomes. But if I want something different, if I want something higher, if I want to continue growing, if I want to continue progressing, I actually have to leave this behind, if that makes sense.
I have to move beyond the basics. Okay, here's a
Move beyond the
comparison.
basics. I like
It's
that.
like you look at the Ten Commandments. Like, are the Ten Commandments ever going to be irrelevant? No way. They're fantastic. They're awesome. But if I look at the Ten Commandments as like, that's it, man.
Right.
That's the whole of truth and religion is keep the Ten Commandments and you're good. That's way too small.
Right.
It's way too small. And if we want to rise,
And-
then we have to keep all the Ten Commandments easily and actually
move beyond
pursue more commandments.
It also, I think there's also a nuance here, because I just recently read an article about this where in essence, the Ten Commandments are transactional, where ultimately we want to move into the transformational.
Exactly.
We want to focus on the commandments, the laws, the principles that transform us, not just that are kind of like check the box, transactional. And that, I think, as we get into this discussion about why people are leaving the church, the Christian church in the world, it's because there's too much of a focus on the transactional. Mm-hmm. There's too much of a focus on do this, don't do that, don't do this, do that thing.
Because we start coming up with lots and lots of rules.
Right. It becomes, to me, very similar to the Sanhedrin or the Pharisees in Jesus' time, where that was one of the things in this article too, it pointed out. Like, yeah, it started with the 10 commandments, but by the time Jesus was on the earth, they had 613 commandments. Like, itemizing every little thing. And while a lot of us think, well, that's not happening today, it's totally happening today, even though it's not per se written down anywhere, or it's like a commandment, but every church has these things that are like, oh, we don't do that.
Well, and a lot of families do. We've seen this so many times in families that you stop and look at it and you're like, good night. Like these parents are the epitome of the Sanhedrin or Pharisees, legitimately. But
right.
I don't know. I didn't live in Jesus' time, but I'm imagining many of the Pharisees
did it from the goodness of their heart.
Yes, they wanted to be exactly obedient.
Right.
Like, they wanted the right thing.
Obedience.
And I know a lot of these parents, with the best of intention, are like, I know what to do. Let's make way more rules and way more. And they become abstract and arbitrary. But no, we're doing this because we're like super righteous. And now you might be thinking, well, Greg, didn't you just say we move beyond the 10 commandments to other commandments?
And there's more commandments.
Yeah, there's more commandments. But I guess it's worth the distinction there. It's not like I'm going to come up with another 500 specific, very specific rules. Like, at this exact time I have to do this. And I can only do this, but only to that extent, because then after that's a violation. It's what I was referring to is the higher laws, specifically something from like the Sermon on the Mount, right? And loving God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor, and being of good cheer. Like, nobody's ever thought, well, is that a commandment?
Am I keeping that commandment?
Like,
am I being of good cheer?
As you see that, like, it's like, yeah, be of good cheer. Doubt not, fear not. Like, wow. Those ones are tough. That's the refinement. That's the growth. And it's not some be in your house before midnight because evil is unleashed at that hour. It's like, what are you talking about? It's just absurd. It's so silly.
So it's a focus on the transformational aspects of it rather than just the transactional aspects. And I think one of the biggest challenges with that whole idea, and again, one of the reasons why religion exists with its dogma and its formality, is because it's trying to help people find that path. Because unless you have some sort of spiritual development, you really can be like, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I change my life? I don't know what to do. And so it is helpful to have someone to tell us, do this, don't do that, do
and
this.
we love it.
And we do love it, especially when we start out.
I used to be very much like that. And I still know a lot of people. It's like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. It's like I pled for that. Just tell me what to do,
All the
and
rules,
I'll do it.
all the laws, everything.
And yeah,
Even to the point where you used to wear your shorts below your knees because you just thought that was one of the things.
right,
Oh,
like there's a line of like above the knee is one thing, below the knee's
righteous.
a better thing.
Higher way.
And you get it, and so you're like, well, I want to be even better. I want to be even better, and so you start thinking more rules, more rules, more rules. But that's not necessarily the case because it becomes more transactional.
Right. And so it is, I think, as we grow and develop, it actually becomes something that's more intuitive and more individualized.
Yes, but that gets risky because
that's
you're
what I'm
like,
talking
whoa,
about.
did you just step into relativism?
Right, exactly.
And aren't there hard rules? And when you look at the Bible and the scriptures, we love to think that they're rule books, but they're not. Because if they were strict rule books, we were supposed to beat our children with a rod, and women are not to speak out, right?
Right.
And you think, well, but that's a misunderstanding, and that's so then we go through and we make little exceptions, but then something else in there is like, oh yeah, that's a hard rule. You're like, well, wait a minute, it's a guidebook.
Right.
The sacred texts are guidebooks with principles and practices.
One of the best approaches I've heard is talking about how it's a book of wisdom.
Yeah.
Like the Bible specifically has contradictory statements in it because it's trying to teach us that, sometimes you do this thing and sometimes you do the opposite.
Yep.
Like that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is knowing when to use which thing at what time.
And some people would dismiss that. No, that must be a translation error. It got,
Except
it
it
got
happens
corrupted
again
over
and
time.
again and again
exactly.
and again
So
in the Bible.
If we're willing to stop and be like, no, hold up, just be willing to accept this for a minute. Sometimes they killed, and sometimes they didn't. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they did one thing, and then they said the opposite. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, no, something must be wrong because this is the eternal
How could the Bible
truth.
contradict itself?
And you're like, well,
that's the point.
That's life. And there are contradictions in life, and there are deep ironies in life. And it's super powerful. So one of the things that I wanted to really emphasize today is that with the access to the gospel, and even what some people call the fullness of the gospel, the church and the people in the church comes the shameful word should be way better. Like way, way better. And if we have the teachings of Jesus and we have the truth of God, why this is where I could be misunderstood and where I'm going to sound critical and maybe, I don't know. I don't want to come across as prideful or this whole holier than thou, or I'm not coming from this approach of I'm better. What I'm saying is like, why aren't we all better? As an organization, why aren't we absolutely voraciously chasing greatness? Why are we limping along in often embarrassing mediocrity? And sometimes sub-mediocre. Like it's so bad often that it's below mediocre. Like, are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Like, there's so much potential, so much greatness available sitting right here on the table in front of us. And the best we can do is offer one of the most boring sermons that's ever been delivered on this planet. Are you kidding me? There's so much truth. There's so much potential. There's so much goodness. And all you can do is just
read from a manual.
That's what I was thinking. Read from a manual. And we can have the most transformative discussions. But, those kind of questions aren't allowed in here, brother or sister. We can't doubt. We can't ask hard questions. And
can't debate.
There's no debating. And then, the most pathetic answer, which seems like the spiritual answer, is when the hard questions are asked, you're like, well, you just need to have more faith. That is such a cop-out. It is such an absolute cop-out. And so with all that, all the greatness and the potential for Christ's true church, we're just limping along. Now, I can hear people in their mind saying, because I used to say it, I used to teach it, well, the church is like a hospital, and we're all sick. And I was like, oh, that's a great metaphor. And I used to share that. Oh, the church is a gathering place for sick people. And then after a while, I started thinking, wait a minute. Why are they all still sick? Isn't anybody getting whole? Like,
Hospital isn't a place you're supposed to stay.
right? Yeah, you
It's meant to be
don't go to the
temporary.
hospital like I'm sick and like move in permanently. Like bring all your belongings, move in, and stay sick. And everybody else is sick, and we all are sick together. It's like, well, wait a minute. Who's healing? So if the metaphor were realistic, you'd go to the hospital, get some healing, and then you'd leave. So are you supposed to come in and then leave? Do you outgrow the church? Or is that just a really crappy metaphor? And then, but people, they embrace it. They live it. And then, then the patients become the nurses and doctors. You're like, oh, come here. Oh, you're a patient, but you've been here a while. Why don't you perform the surgery over here? Like, what in the world? What? No! Ah! Get me out of here! Like, what's going on? Why isn't there massive transformation? Why aren't we having a far, far better experience Sundays and in our Sunday schools or scripture study, Bible studies? Like, it should be absolutely phenomenal.
Right.
And now this is where I'm attacking a sacred crowd. People are like, oh, you're questioning God. No, I'm not. You're questioning Jesus. No, I'm not. I'm looking at
human organizations.
I'm looking at what's there and saying, guys, like we're dropping the ball massively. And I know many people will be like, how dare you? How dare you question the leaders? Dare you question the pastors or the bishops or
the Pope?
These people? Yeah, how dare you question him? Like, no, we have to question. We have to stop and say, how can this be done better?
Well, and for me, one of the reasons I actually believe that strongly is because when I look at the history of the Christian religion, what I see is a pattern of questioning. I see Jesus coming, questioning what was going on. He was a Jew. He was Jewish. And yet he was questioning
the church.
Religion.
Yeah.
Questioning the church.
And
challenging it, actually.
His whole ministry and message was questioning the church.
And directly, intentionally challenging it.
So wait, what you're saying, Rachel, is that if I'm trying to be like Jesus, I should be questioning the church.
Exactly.
And I should be challenging practices of the church.
Well, because then if you continue to look
But I'm not Jesus.
Right, you're not. If you continue to look through the history of Christianity itself, there's an ongoing pattern of that behavior. In fact, Martin Luther himself wrote out 90 things that he disagreed with the Catholic Church and nailed it to the door of the church. He wrote it all out, nailed it to the door, and said, these are all the 90 things I disagree with.
And then they said, we're going to kill you.
And then they said, we're going to kill you because you're a heretic. But Martin Luther was one of the great reformers. It's because of Martin Luther.
Phenomenal human being and Christian.
Exactly. And it's because of Martin Luther that the Protestant movement began, which then in essence is the source of every single other religion, Christian religion in the world, is Protestant. Because of Martin Luther.
Because they were protesting.
They were protesting Catholicism.
Things that weren't being done well in the church. Like, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't line up. And then as you look through many, let's call them prophets.
Right.
I would think Martin Luther is an excellent prophet.
Right.
He's a great example. Although, he's not in the scriptures and no one's calling him prophet. He's just an excellent example of a prophet. And there's been many more. I would call Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Another one. He was a pastor in Germany. Like, wow. And you should read. Eric Metaxas wrote books on both of them, biographies.
But the history of these prophets is that they're essentially questioning and debating the existing ideas at the time and presenting new ones or having an argument in favor of other ideas. That's been the history. And
you look at any prophet that God called.
Exactly.
Look what John the Baptist was doing.
Right.
And of course the apostles.
Protesting, calling out.
Moses, Noah.
Pointing out, disagreeing. Like that to me is the history of how God works in the world. He works that way. That is how he works through people.
They're going contrary, they're revolutionist
existing
the
beliefs.
So, and somebody just, as in our family, we were just sharing this, and somebody, was it Aaliyah that came across the definition of a prophet? It was like
Oh, yeah.
basically it's like
It actually came from when we're listening to a series on Exodus with Jordan Peterson and several other scholars, and he basically said in passing, like, the role of a prophet is one who critiques society or
right.
something like that.
And to a point where, like, most of the prophets, either they attempted to kill them or did kill them. They succeeded in killing them because these guys are revolutionists. They're standing up against social tides and currents.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's worth emphasizing. And that's one of the main messages inside Metaxas's book, A Letter to the American Church. He's like, we should be standing up boldly as Christians. We should be boldly standing up against the absurdities that are being spread through society right now. And yet we remain quiet. And churches and the leaders of churches, they don't dare speak up because they will get absolutely blasted in the media and other ways. But guess what? Like, I don't see anywhere where the prophets were like, society will not be kind to me, so I'm going to stay quiet.
Right.
And when they speak out and there's this big outrage on social media, like, how dare you take a stand? How dare you have values and standards? You're offending people. Like, are you kidding me? I don't see anywhere where they would just cower to society and their absurdities.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way here, and again, I'm not Jesus, and I'm not a prophet, fortunately, because I don't want that role. But as an observer, I have to ask, where are the prophets who are boldly speaking out against the absolute absurdities in society? Jordan Peterson's doing it. And I
was going to say that, but I was like, I'll just be quiet. I bring up Jordan Peterson too much.
He's doing it. And there are others that are doing it.
There are a lot of people who are doing it. Yes.
There's individuals who are doing it so well, and they've built up large platforms. And I often think, wow, these individuals are doing it better than the churches. How is this even possible? How is it that they, of their own accord, say, you know, this is unacceptable. I'm doing this. And they're doing it better. And we're being put to shame all by other individuals or organizations. Like, no, why aren't we rising up?
Right. And again, I mean, I want to reemphasize that we fully believe in religion. We believe in the importance of religion. We believe in our religion. We believe in principles of, that are taught in most of these religions. Like, all of these things are necessary, they're important, but we also can't ignore what we have seen through our own study, our own search, our own walking of the labyrinth, these patterns, these ideas that feel like sacred cows, right? Where there is, in essence, this history of this necessity, even like called of God necessity to say, wait a second, this isn't being done as well as it could be.
Yep.
This is actually detrimental. This is having a negative effect. And for me, back to the idea of one of the things I mentioned, like, why are people leaving the churches? It's because, in essence, because this is something Jordan Peterson also talks about plenty, because he's interviewed lots of pastors from Catholic churches to Protestant churches to all over. He's talked to them. It's a global phenomenon. Why are people leaving the churches? It's essentially because they're not being called to something great. They're not being challenged to some noble aim. And
they're not being fed.
They're not being fed by the good word of God. They're not. And if you, at least in my own experience, if I go to church, I can see that firsthand. Yep. It's not happening because most of the people around me, myself included, are bored out of our minds, trying to keep ourselves awake, and we're just not being challenged spiritually, intellectually, socially. Like, it's just, It's just not there.
Yep.
And I know that some people would, argue about that. And I totally agree. There are definitely churches out there where that is happening. So I'm not saying that this is, a
Universal.
blanket statement,
Right.
universal. It is happening. And we have on occasion been to some of those churches. But we've also traveled a lot and we've been to a lot of churches. And I would say the norm, more often than not, is a sense of boredom.
And just checking the boxes of like,
Of
I
being
went
there.
to church.
Like, yeah, I'm supposed to be at church. I'm at church.
And-
Check.
And that's extremely dangerous, because then you can go home patting yourself on the back, believing that you are on this path of salvation
Right.
and righteousness because I go to church.
Exactly.
And you're like, yeah, what did you actually get out of it?
Especially when we're talking about transformation rather than just transaction. Like,
Right.
just going to church is transactional. But if there's not transformation that's occurring there, then it's, in my mind, it's really just useless.
Yeah.
It's pointless. If you're not experiencing transformation, then your going to church is not of
pointless.
value.
Yeah. You're not getting the value out of it
Right.
because the value is not being, well, in many cases, the value is not being offered.
Right.
Like, I heard, I saw this, I don't even know what it was, a bumper sticker or something. It was like, going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in a garage makes you a car. And I thought, at first I was like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, well, no, you can never become a car. So I thought, well, wait a minute. It's better, like, going to church doesn't make you righteous or spiritual or help you in any way, just like merely going to the gym would help you get in great shape.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I go to the gym every day and check the box and then go home, like, it doesn't mean I'm going to get in great shape.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm going to be a fit athlete. It means nothing. Like, I see people consistently go to the gym and never get results because what they're doing isn't working.
Right.
And the way they're doing it isn't working. Maybe that's what I really want to emphasize today is, like, go to the gym and do it right and do it with intensity and consistency. Get those results that we're supposed to be getting
Right.
by participating in church.
Well, and maybe this is a good analogy because, we're not saying, I guess one way we are saying, like, yes, you can also get fit outside of the gym.
Absolutely.
You don't necessarily have to go to the gym to get fit. You could get it at home. You could get it by running. You could get it in other ways. So that's a possibility. But we are also saying, yeah, go to the gym, but make sure you're doing the workouts.
Yeah.
And make sure they have the right equipment.
Yep.
Because sometimes just not having the right equipment means you're not getting the fitness because they don't have what you need to get fit.
Yep.
So
and good trainers. And, like, I guess, is this time to bring up home church? Like, if you do home education, it's possible to get a world-class education at home.
especially nowadays, even more so.
This is going to be misunderstood, and some will hear it as heresy. Could home church be absolutely world-class? Is it possible? And I want to invite all of you listening, really honestly answer this. Wrestle with it. Don't just brush it off. Don't just push it aside. Really, really wrestle with this. Is it possible at home, on your own with your family, to truly come closer to God?
I think the first time I ever heard of home church, which was ironic because that was one of my sacred cows. I just thought, well, no, that would never be a thing. I have to go to church. I have to be at a church. But we know the super awesome family. They used to be Mennonite, I think. They still dress in that way, but they have officially left their specific congregation or whatever because they're also unconventional.
It was kind of, and they were kind of Amish, Mennonite, and they live in Amish country
know,
now.
Yeah, I don't know all the differences between those sects or whatever, but essentially Mennonite, Amish, something like that. But they had a large family, amazing people. They had 10 kids, I think. They had adopted a bunch of them, some of them with special needs. But they had, and I don't know all the details of their story, but essentially they had left their group,
Their congregation.
because of some falling out or something. But they told us, they're like, well, we just do home church. And that was the first time I'd ever come across that idea. And I was just like, oh.
And
Well,
these,
yeah, I mean,
these are amazing.
like, these people are
amazing
Christian.
human
They are
beings.
like salt of the earth.
Gosh, I want to be more like
Yeah.
them.
And, but it struck me at the time because I thought, well, yeah, I chose to homeschool. Home church, that's interesting. But it was several, I mean, that was a long time ago, pre-COVID
Yep.
even. But I think that idea in itself opened us up to, because before that, we always believed that we couldn't personally live in a part of the world where a congregation of our church didn't exist.
Right.
But because of that, we were open, and we ended up going to Morocco.
Well, we had some
lived in
we had
Morocco.
visa restrictions at
Yeah.
one point, and so we had to leave, and we were out for 3 months, and there was no congregation of our church, and
Yeah.
so we thought, well, let's just do it
Let's
at
do
home.
home church. And so we did home church. That was in, I
It
think,
was amazing.
2015, 2016. It was one of the best experiences we've had with church, right? When we did home church. And then, of course, during COVID,
For context, too, for people who might be new or listening, like I went through a seminary, and then I actually taught in seminary.
so
Like,
you essentially have a doctorate in religion.
Yeah, I taught religion for years. Like I went deep dive
Mm-hmm.
into this, and so and I love it, and I love the study of it. I love the history of it. I love teaching it. I love studying the pedagogy, like how to effectively teach it. Like I love all of this stuff, and so that was also one of the things that led me to question, like, wait, we should be so much more effective as teachers
Well,
and
okay,
preachers.
here's one of the ironies of life, and I see this time and again, that once we get good at something, we also become a good critic
Yep.
of that thing. And because you were good at teaching, you are a great teacher, and you had gone through all the training of teaching specifically in religion, you started early on saying, wait a second, why don't we have better teachers in religion?
Yep.
Like we could have some of the best in the world. You know, we could have some of the best teaching out there, and yet we don't. Why? Why don't we have that?
Yep.
Because it's possible, it's available, especially when you just learn, some teaching skills. So anyways, back to this idea of home church, so COVID, of course, happened. A lot of people experienced that. And I heard from a lot of people about how much they loved home church.
Yeah,
Like it
they
was
absolutely loved it.
a great thing. And
Now, what happens at home is then the entire responsibility of the family. So if spiritual growth takes place, great. If it doesn't, not
on
so
you,
great.
right.
But either way, it's on you. So just saying, well, we're all at home, like, okay, it's going to be a magnifier of what you actually do with it.
right.
And it's important to point out that some families can do it and do it phenomenally well. And you look through the scriptures. Look through the scriptures of all the examples of individuals or families essentially out on their own, becoming some of the greatest people who've ever lived. So those of you who are feeling like your sacred cow is being attacked, look at your very own scriptures for all the examples of people who said, no, what's happening at church is a mess.
We're
I'm doing
leaving.
this on my
We're
own.
doing it on our
I'm
own."
leaving, and did it phenomenally well. John the Baptist, because even what Jesus said about John the Baptist, that he was one of the greatest ever born of women or whatever, like, and what was John doing? He wasn't like in
He
the
wasn't going to
churches
church.
like, I'm going to head to the synagogue and listen to what the Pharisees and
In my suit and
Sadducees have to
tie.
say. Yeah, I'm going to get all decked out. He was dressed like a wild man out on his own in the desert, and Jesus said he's one of the best men that was ever born.
Right.
This is so interesting.
Yeah.
And then the most quoted prophet by Jesus himself is Isaiah. And if you deep dive in Isaiah, I spent 3 years deep diving in Isaiah. Isaiah's message is a severe rebuke of the church. That is Isaiah. He's ripping the church to shreds for their mediocre behavior.
Right. Back to the pattern that we've noticed, that's even starting with Jesus through Isaiah, it was before Jesus, so starting before Jesus,
Yep.
and then the reformers, and on, that's the pattern.
Yep.
The pattern is, how do I say, criticizing the existing institution
Yeah.
in a way.
Yep.
And that sounds like you're killing a sacred cow right there.
You
What?
are.
Criticize the
And-
existing institution?
And they hate it. Like, how dare you? How could
That's
you?
wrong.
Yeah.
That's terrible. And yet, I think that's the only way that reformation has ever come about.
That's the only way improvement comes about.
True. It is the only way improvement comes about. It's only by criticizing and noticing the things that are wrong and need to be improved that you actually make improvement.
Yep.
That's true in our own lives. That's true in our marriages. That's true in our parenting. Like, that's just a true principle. I think that's just a foundational principle.
Yeah. So the greatest danger is taking someone or something and saying, no, they're outside of examination. That is
Infallible.
outside. That's outside of questioning. It's outside of any of that. And the great risk there is that it's easy to slip into subpar performance because it's never being questioned or examined. Like, we have to be willing to question it, and that's difficult and uncomfortable.
It is very much uncomfortable. It is very, for some people, blasphemous or
Heretical whatever.
or apostate, or,
Yeah.
there's all of these, again, belonging to the sacred cows, there's all of these ideas where we think if I do that thing, or if I question that thing, or if I believe this thing, I am now outside of the gospel, I'm outside of the church, I'm outside of salvation, I'm outside of, whatever it is. But in my own experience, which has been essentially, I believe, a faith building experience, because I believe my faith is stronger now than it ever was before.
Same for me.
It came by me being willing to question and, if necessary, kill the sacred cows.
Absolutely. And like we've mentioned multiple times, like that was the journey of spirituality and of prophets, of attacking those things and shutting them down. And it's important to do this. Like, no prophet has ever said, I am infallible.
In fact, they say the opposite.
Yeah, they're like, hey, we make mistakes.
And yet, too often, people want to put them on a pedestal. I mean, I even remember growing up that I had this, I don't know if it came from specifically the church or just people around me, that in essence, all the prophets were perfect. That Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and, all of them were perfect. And I remember, even not that long ago, listening to Jordan Peterson. I mean, this was like several years ago, but listening to him critiquing the prophets and pointing out that, no, God is using these very imperfect men and women who make mistakes, who get drunk, who do all kinds of things that they shouldn't be doing, but yet that's the people God is working with to prove that he's God, I guess, and we're human, and he's going to use our humanness to reach his goals and his ends, right? Like, it's not, his gospel being spread is not dependent upon perfection of human beings.
Right. And so then I think it's wise and mature of us to realize that leaders and prophets make mistakes. And that doesn't undo their prophetness, as I make up a word there. It has nothing to do with that. It's like,
Right.
Oh yeah, they were wrong about that. But there's that sacred cow again. It's like, wait a minute. They made a mistake. If they were wrong about something, that must mean they're not good or not true or not prophets or not leaders. No, that's just not the case.
Right.
This is not the case. And so there's some spiritual maturity there to be like, oh, yeah, if they're not infallible, which they are not, and they'll be the first to tell you, then of necessity, they make mistakes.
And I think that that's true in organizations in general. The very nature of an organization is the fact that, because organizations are necessary, whether they're religious or corporate or, education system, whatever. They're necessary, like we talked about already. Yep. They are necessary. We need them.
Yep.
But the inherent danger of organizations are that they also become bureaucratic. They become dogmatic, like they become rigid, and in their rigidity they lose some of that natural flexibility and intuition and
transformation.
They
become transactional.
Power. Exactly, they become transactional.
And almost without exception, the bigger they get, the worse they get. In a very real way.
Which is just the nature of
growth.
Organizations.
Yep.
Like that's true no matter what.
Yep.
Government, business. If you just look at organizations in general, that's what happens. They become bigger and more behemoth and more
And
dinosaur-like.
then their manual of instructions gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, it
Well,
gets
and
so
then-
far extended that it's somebody else handing a manual to somebody else and saying, this is how we do things. And
Right.
you're like, oh, man.
Which in a way is necessary. It's necessary for the growth to occur, but it also has an inherent weakness in it, which leans towards, in essence, totalitarianism. It leans towards this controlling power, which is the end all, be all, say all, do all. Like it's the authority, which is what the prophets have always been fighting against, right? It's what Jesus fought against,
Yep.
fighting against the Pharisees. I mean, that's what, it's the natural cycle that continues to happen. It has been happening for thousands of years, and it continues to happen and needs to continue to happen because that's how growth and development and transformation occur. By saying, hey, organization, and this is true whether it's the school system or the government, we have to say, wait, you're becoming too rigid, you're becoming too controlling. We need some reformation here. We need change.
You're getting
We
too
need-
watered down. You're getting too mediocre. You're not delivering on the
Right.
goods.
We have to focus on the basics and the grassroots in a way, which is a bottom down, a bottom up instead of a top down, because that's inevitably what happens. As an organization grows, it becomes very top down, which is the manuals and the instructions and the directives. And we have to restore some of that grassroots bottom up magic that is where it came from. Like that's where the organizations originally came from.
And by questioning.
Christianity started grassroots.
Yeah.
Jesus and some disciples out teaching the world. That's how it started.
And even all the Protestant churches, all
Exactly.
the churches have
All
popped
the
up.
Protestant
Somebody's like, "Hey,
churches-
wait a minute,
Yeah.
nah, that doesn't jive,"
Yep.
and they start questioning. and
Grassroots.
they-
That's how it grows.
They go from that, and it's so powerful. Okay, but then you said something that's like, "Well, wait a minute." You're saying we need to go back to grassroots. We need to go back to the basics, which is true and good. But then another criticism is if we teach the basics. And we teach the basics, and we teach the basics, and the basics.
Well,
and then
yeah, I guess I
we
don't mean
always
teach the basics. I mean,
teach the basics.
in some ways, I feel like the basics, it's more of this sense of discovery and interest and passion and communication and debate. Every movement has begun that way. It began by people discussing ideas, disagreeing, conversing, doubting, questioning.
Yes, but almost always, I'm just thinking out loud here, almost always the questioner was so well read and so thoughtful and so intellectual that they had
Maybe.
Okay, maybe, but let's think of some. I'm obviously like Martin Luther, right? He, instead of just going along and accepting everything that he's being fed and told, he's deeply studying in the scriptures, saying, "Wait a minute, this doesn't jive. What about this?
Well-
What about this? What about this? What about this?"
Yeah.
And so my point is here, we have to move beyond the basics, and I think every church needs to be offering a space for those who are brand new to religion, brand new to faith, and they need the basics. It's beautiful. But it has to offer a place for growth, for real growth,
Right.
for people who want to move at a faster pace,
Well, if
who
we
really want to excel, and I don't know, they want to grow.
right.
Where's the spot for them?
Yeah, because if we think about, if we continue to use the school system comparison, again, necessary, important, it's a foundational piece there, it's a safety net, and that's true, that's still true. Everything we've said about church and religion does not discount the fact that for many people, it is needed and necessary. I mean, we know people right now, right here, I can think of many of them, who they need the basics that the church has to offer.
Yep.
That's important and they need it. But you're right that if we think about it like the school system, well, you're not supposed to just go to school and then stay in first grade or second grade or third grade or fourth grade or elementary school. You're supposed to continue to progress on. There should be levels, there should be grades, there should be, this progression that occurs rather than you come, you go to the same class and you stay in the same class forever.
And you just repeat the lessons indefinitely.
Right.
And when somebody says, "Hey, is there another level to this? Can we talk about something a little bit maybe?"
Then
Can we
we-
do
no,
some
repetition
advanced?
is important. That's
Well,
how
they'll
we
say
learn.
repetition is important. Or they'll say, "Who do you think you are? Like, is pride getting in your heart, brother? Are you becoming arrogant, sister, to think you know this already? that you're.
Do you think you are learned and wise?
Yeah,
and
you're so special, and like.
You're like, no, I just want to go to college now. Like,
yeah.
can I go to college? Can I get a bachelor's?
Then after I
How
have my
about maybe
bachelor's and master's, and I
a
get a doctorate, can I get another doctorate?
Right.
Can I get another doctorate? Can I please keep going if I want to? And the response is usually, be more humble.
Right. And have
and more
faith.
faithful, and study on your own. You're like, wait a minute. If real growth is me studying on my own,
why am I coming to school?
Why do I come to church again? You with me? Like, these are hard questions we need to ask.
Yeah.
And without getting thrown in the box or under the bus of pride, arrogance. Like, no, wait a minute. Let's have these discussions and let's really think through them and say, well, yeah, why isn't this being done better? And I guess this is a perfect point for something else I really want to emphasize. And I want to invite everybody listening. I want you to look at real results. So no more sugarcoating, no more facades, no more cute little statements of like, well, everybody's sick and it's this, that, and the other. I want just honestly gut check. Pull the rose-colored glasses off. Look at the results. Mm-hmm. Is your congregation producing real results? Or are they just slightly better than the rest of society? And as society goes down the toilet, and if you guys aren't seeing that, I don't know where you live or what bubble you got your head in. Like, society is just right down the toilet. It is an absolute toilet. Like, it's so bad.
And that's not to say there's good people everywhere.
Oh my goodness, there's so many good people.
The trend is heading down.
And just look at the big numbers, like the number for health.
Which is a natural part
look at the United
of the
States.
fourth turning and all of that. And that's the part we're in right now, is that the end of the fourth turning. So it's to be expected. It's a part of that.
So it's physical health, mental, emotional health, spiritual health. Then you look at the trends of behaviors and what's going on, this weird, bizarre, crazy stuff, and then addictions. And then the pornography and the sexual addictions and the
sex trafficking and
the
human
trafficking that's
trafficking.
going. And the U.S. is the number one consumer worldwide,
Yeah,
and a lot of them are going to church.
And human trafficking.
And they're churchgoers, all this stuff. So I guess my point is here, and I know this is a criticism, and I know this can be misunderstood. So give me the benefit of the doubt if you're misunderstanding me. Let's look at the results, because results don't lie. So if you're sitting there thinking, my church is the best, and my congregation's amazing, and this is so special and so powerful, look at it without the rose-colored glasses. Is it actually making a difference?
And
is it transactional, or is it literally transforming lives? And if it's not transforming lives, we have to ask the hard questions and make the hard changes.
And this is not to in any way judge people as not being good people, because this has nothing to do with that.
Right.
There are good people in all of these churches that we're talking about. We're not saying that they're all bad people and porn addicts or anything like that. What we're trying to say...
Or that even if you are a porn addict, that you're a bad person.
Exactly, right.
It's not.
Exactly. What we're trying to say is, look at the results.
Yeah.
Look at, like everything you said, do they have a happy marriage? Or is it just a facade? Do they have great relationships with their children and they're getting great results with their children? Or are they just checking the boxes and then saying, oh, well, children have agency, so I guess they're going to make mistakes and hate me, Are they obese? Because that is one of the indicators of the society problem that is not any better in churches, you know what I'm saying? Because they're all just following the same trends of poor health, which is the precursor to disease. Like, it just is, right? And you would think that as a church, if we believe in being the children of God, that we would have different results. We would actually care about the bodies that God had given to us and have way better health.
That our bodies are temples.
Yeah.
And you might be wondering, wait a minute, what does obesity have to do with spirituality? And my answer is everything.
Exactly. It's true. And we can go through item after item and saying, okay, what kind of results are people actually getting who proclaim to be Christians?
Yep. Because in a holistic sense, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, those things should all be trending upward.
Yes. Right. And we're not talking about, oh, well, if you don't meet this standard or whatever, that's the problem. No, we're talking about a trend upward. Yeah. Like over time, you should be producing better results as you continue to experience transformation.
Yeah.
And if that's not occurring, then something's wrong.
This is when I have my imaginary
Something's wrong.
pulpit as a preacher and I do some pulpit pounding. Then, and as you know, one of the observations I'm making here is that the church is failing. If something's wrong in one aspect, obviously, like, and people are going to say, well, it's the individual's responsibility. Yes, it is. But in this conversation specifically, the church is failing to provide what it easily could provide. It is failing to level up to its own potential. Mm-hmm. How in the world can we have the gospel of Jesus Christ and then provide such a dismally pathetic experience? I'm just gonna be honest, like to me, at least my perspective, it's embarrassing and shameful. And it's a disgrace to truth and goodness and like.
And again, this is not to discount the role it is playing, because we're admitting that.
Yes.
We're admitting that, yes, it is
Yes.
playing a role. It is providing a safety net
It's
for
so
some. It's
important.
helping them to stop drink or
Yes.
just to stop their addictions or
Yes.
to whatever, forgive. It
Yep.
is doing all of those things.
So
and it
yes,
is doing it on a basic
Every
level,
Sunday,
a necessary
people
level.
are having beautiful experiences
Yes.
and making changes.
Absolutely.
Yes,
that
yes,
is
yes.
happening. But
So this
in the
is-
context of this conversation, we're talking about the upward reach. We're
Right.
talking about the ongoing growth and development of the members, especially over a long period of time.
Yes, they should be palpably, discernibly getting better fast.
Well,
And
not
obvious.
even necessarily fast, but just like obviously, so, like consistently.
There's
It
an
doesn't have
upward
to be fast,
trend that's
but it
obvious.
should be
Yeah.
consistent at
There's
least.
palpable, measurable progress like, oh, this is working.
Right.
And this is hard. This is what makes this conversation so hard, because at a basic level, you're like, yeah, look, this person was just struggling so much, and now they're not struggling with that thing. It's amazing, and like,
And that is.
some
That's
of
good.
it's miraculous and wonderful and beautiful, and we celebrate that and we acknowledge that. And that's what makes this conversation so hard, is because when you look at something. And okay, this is what makes personal development hard. This is what makes marriage is hard, parenting hard. Yes, we have to celebrate what we are achieving. Yes, we have to celebrate where we've come from. But we can't stop there. And so...
Well, and we need to celebrate what has got us to that point, which includes religion. It includes the church. Like, at least in our own lives especially, that has been a foundational aspect of our marriage, our growth. So we're not discounting that. We are not making light of that, because we know that played a huge role.
Yeah, absolutely
It's
pivotal.
very significant. Included the church. It's necessary. It's important. But we also can't just sit back on that and be like, well, okay,
great.
so I guess now if we're just bored and spiritually dying, then we just have to hold on to the end and wait for our time in heaven to make up for it.
This is
I don't believe
tough.
that that's what it's supposed to be like.
because growth and refinement requires a constant re-examination and say, hey, yeah, what you did was great. That's fantastic. Well, okay, for me as a husband, right? I made all these changes before I met Rachel, and I could have been like, you have no idea what I was like.
Yeah,
I had an
I was bad.
insane temper, and it was so
Just
bad.
be
and
grateful.
You should just love me for who I am. I made so much progress, but I never, ever, ever asked her to love me as I am, and I
See,
still don't
that's-
today.
That's interesting too, because in some ways, if we think about it that way, many churches are saying, hey, this is just who I am. Like, this is how the church is.
Yeah.
Just come and accept it. Just deal with it. Just put up with it how it is. Just find a way to endure, find a way to make it through, but just show up.
And if you want a
be
better
there.
experience, it's on you. It's your responsibility
It's
to
your
bring
responsibility.
a better experience.
I'm not going to change. I'm not going to do things differently. That's on you. And that if we, even use the metaphors that Christ has used. If we're in this marriage with the church, that's a crap attitude.
Yeah, that's a horrible attitude.
To expect all the responsibility for what you get out of this relationship to come from me, and you have no responsibility, that just doesn't work.
Nope.
You know what I mean? So, like, yes, absolutely. We have to do our part. We have to be seeking. We have to be praying. We have to be, like, fully engaged as much as possible. But at some point, there needs to be reciprocation, I think. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There has to be reformation, change, transformation coming from the church itself and the organizations and how they're run. And really it does. It's going to happen grassroots. It's going to happen bottom up, because in many, many ways it's so difficult to make those changes tops down. It just is. Like, that's the nature of organization itself. So
this is hard.
It is.
Like I realize the complexity of it, and all, like, for years and years when I questioned or other people questioned, the thought was, oh, it's pride. It's pride. And so now, but we have to beg the question, is it possible to question and criticize the church without being, as a humble person? Is it possible?
Well, as a seeker of truth.
Can somebody who's genuinely chasing greatness, can they be humble?
Chasing truth.
And they're chasing truth. Can they be humble and question the church and how things are being done?
Right.
Yes.
At least for me, that is where this entire conversation that we're having, our willingness to discuss and kill sacred cows and question and doubt, came about because I was sincerely seeking truth. Like, that's what I wanted. I just wanted to know the truth. And for myself, I've had a journey where the religion that we belong to, my parents were not always active in it. In fact, my mom joined it later in life. And then they weren't active at certain times during my childhood, but then they came back to it. I was not active. I think, like, I mentally checked out at 16, and then when I moved out of my house at 18, like, I had nothing to do with it. But then I came back to it because I wanted to find a strong, healthy relationship, a marriage, and so I knew that the place to find that would be in, religion, in church. So I came back to it.
Well, kind of naively, on a little side note, thinking, well, people who go to church are,
Well, compared to the other places, right? If you're going to go to the club or the bar to look for a mate,
you're going,
it's way better to go to church to look for someone. So
Yes.
It's not like people at church are perfect or have everything figured out or all put together, but it's a way different, a way better place to start.
It's a better place to start, but it's also, I think, in this conversation, we have to be willing to look under the hood, so to speak,
Yeah,
or
there's
behind the
definitely
scenes,
that
and realize
aspect
that,
of it. Of churchgoers
yeah,
still have a porn,
of very
church-going men,
active, like,
Christians.
consistent Christian churchgoers, like,
have a porn problem.
at home. Well, they have lots of problems. Their marriages are falling apart. Their health is falling apart. Their family's a train wreck. Their kids are a mess. Like, they have severe addictions to painkillers or porn or
Opiates.
whatever. Like massive problems. But man, they're there every week. Check the box. Put on the show, the masquerade. They just put your Sunday's clothes on and put on your Sunday smile and hold hands with your wife because you just were fighting like cats and dogs, but you're going to church together. And so we put on the show and we get thinking like, oh, Christians are the best. And you're like, no, some of them are the worst. Like, some of the church-going people are some of the worst people on the planet.
And that's so, it is challenging because we fully realize that, we're all here having a human experience, and it can be filled with pain and suffering and trauma and like really hard things. Really. But I guess that's the point of having these types of conversations, is saying, well, let's all do a better job at finding the things that actually work and using them more consistently.
Yes.
So we can all get better, happier results.
Yes.
Because while life does definitely contain suffering, it should contain more joy.
And more healing.
And more healing.
We have
and more
access
happiness.
to the healing power of the gospel, of Christ's gospel. Why aren't we healing?
Right.
What is going on that we have unlimited access to the healing power of the gospel of Christ, and everyone's staying sick? And those wounds are like infected, putrid. Like, what is going on? And the easy cop-out is, well, it's the individual. And of course, the individual has responsibility. Of course.
But if we continue to use this analogy, if you go to the hospital for healing and they don't have the right tools,
Nobody gets better.
then yeah, you're not getting better and you're just remaining.
Or even if the tools are there.
Maybe it's a little bit better than it would be, but the true healing isn't taking place. And so, yeah, the transformation isn't occurring. And again, we're simply basing this conversation off, in some ways, our own experiences.
Right.
What we have seen. Having been to 57 countries, 5 continents, lots and lots of churches, and, just the world in general. Where are the people who are getting those higher level results? And how can we all be a part of making that happen? Because I truly believe that at least that's kind of the point of why we're here, and that's the point of why religion exists, so that we can learn how to get real transformational results in our lives, so that we can find this healing, we can find the peace, we can find the joy, we can have better marriages, we can have better relationships. And in fact, everything we teach, in essence, essentially comes from this gospel foundation of, like, there are principles, there are really things out there that work, and we just have to learn how to use them. Now, one of the problems is that, going back to what we were talking about before, because, I was saying this isn't to say that there aren't good people at the church. There are good people, and that's not really the point. The point is, yes, good people are there.
Yep.
They are good. They have pure hearts. They have pure intentions. But if you have the best intentions, just because you're a good person and you have good intentions is not going to make you a good piano player or a good tennis player. If you want to be good at those things, you have to actually learn those skills.
Yep.
And that's what we're saying here. Just because we're in the church and we're a good person and we go to church does not mean we're going to get a great marriage, because you'll only get that if you have great marriage skills.
Yep.
You're not going to be a great parent, because you're only going to get that if you have great parenting skills. You're not going to be great at money and finances. You're only going to do that if you have great finance skills. All of those are things you can learn, but if the church continues to only focus on the basics, like pray, read your scriptures, go to church, and that's all you ever do, that's not going to produce these higher level results. It's not going to get you to a better marriage just because you continue to pray and go to church.
Well, it won't even get you better spiritual results, because there's
Right.
spiritual skills and practices too. So
Exactly.
if you're just checking the boxes, going through the motions, you can your little Sunday school answers.
Which, again, giving the due where it belongs, yes, that's a great starting point for
Yep.
a lot of people.
Yep.
They need that. You need to start there.
because
But
they
at
have
some
nothing
point,
else.
yeah, but at some point, that's no longer enough.
Right.
Just like if you start doing push-ups and you do 5 push-ups a day, at some point, that's no longer good enough.
Right.
You have to start doing more push-ups or different exercises.
And it's this whole idea that, like, was it Paul that talked about the milk and the meat, and we need milk before meat? And that's true. Absolutely. You need milk before meat. But at what point are we going to start serving up the steaks and the roast?
Right.
I'm dead serious. And when you bring this up, it's like, it's pride again. It must be pride. If you're tired of milk and you want a steak, it must be pride. Or who do you think you are? Or you got to keep helping the people who are still on the milk. Like, no, when are we going to actually get some nourishment? Because you can't live on milk alone, right? And like, come on. Like, where are we going here? And so I get it. It's a criticism. It's difficult. It's a complicated conversation, but there has to be, I think, better performance across the board. And we have to take what's available to us and do a much, much better job all around.
And I think that begins in simple ways by simply being allowed to ask questions, even allowing yourself to ask questions. Kind of back to my journey and my story that I was sharing, I left my religion. And then I came back to it, and it became the foundation of our life together. And I still feel it plays a very important role. But it was because I was sincerely seeking truth that I was willing to ask hard questions. I was willing to dig into evolution to find out if that was real, if I believed that, and if I could believe in evolution and still believe in Christ, still believe in God, Like I was willing to take this journey. And one of the things I remember when I was specifically learning about evolution, there was a Christian man who was talking about it, and in passing, he just said something like, God is not afraid of my questions. Like, there's no question I could come up with that he's going to be shocked by.
He's like,
what?
oh no.
I can't believe you came up with that, or you thought that, He's not afraid of our questions, and he's not afraid of us questioning.
Yep.
So we need to also be not afraid of that. We need to be willing to face it, be willing to go there. There's another thing that Jordan Peterson loves to say or quote, and I don't know if it comes from like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table or something else, but it's essentially this idea that the very thing you need in your journey exists in the place you're most afraid to look.
I think he's quoting Carl Jung.
Yeah, but I'm also mixing it because there is a story from the Knights of the Round Table when they go in search of the Holy Grail, and each one of the knights, they essentially were told, or just did this, where when they went to search for the Holy Grail, they went and they looked at the forest, and the darkest part of the forest is where they began their journey. So it's this idea that the very thing you need to help you on your journey of growth and transformation exists in the place you are afraid to look.
Yep.
For me, years ago, that was evolution. Like, I was just terrified to dive into studying evolution because I thought, oh, if this is true, then that means everything I believe is not true. And so how could I do that? I would rather remain in ignorance and in my beliefs, holding on to my faith, than to actually find out for sure if that was true. And taking that journey actually deepened my faith and helped me to believe more because of what I was willing to face and question and examine. The unexamined life is not worth living, and we have to be willing to embrace and go on that journey.
Yes, and it's fear that's keeping us from looking inside at ourselves and at the church and looking outside for other sources of truth and understanding. Right. Because we're so terrified, and we're terrified for ourselves, we're terrified for our kids, but we're living in fear. And we're basing our decisions, our actions, our habits in fear. Yeah. And that's always going to be a limited life.
Well, okay, one of the things I loved, because we are, as a family, we're studying Exodus. We're going through the Exodus series with Jordan Peterson and other scholars. And one of the things that they were talking about in the lecture we were watching yesterday was this idea of spoiling the Egyptians. And it's essentially when Moses is leading them out, or God's telling Moses that when the Israelites leave, they're going to take or borrow jewels and gold and all of these things from the Egyptians. Like, they're basically going to be taking it with them and like, okay, thanks, we're going to take this to use it. And they end up using it, one, to build a golden calf, but they also end up later using it to build the tabernacle, the temple. And so there's this whole idea that exists of spoiling the Egyptians, which is essentially being able to look around you in the world, look at the foreign, look at the things that are strange and outside of what your culture or belief system is, and being able to find truth there, being able to find jewels and gold and things of value, and bringing that in to your belief system and being able to incorporate it and to make use of it. Now, the point they were saying with the story is that, yeah, there is a danger there. You could bring this in and it could become a false idol. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that happen with some of our friends and family members. They go looking outside and they find these truths out there.
The very first thing they find.
Yeah,
like,
the very first
what?
thing. Yeah. This is true.
Everything.
And then that now becomes their false idol.
Yep.
This golden calf that they begin worshiping is like, no, this is the thing. And we're like, no, that's great, but there's more. Keep walking the labyrinth path. You're going to find more, right? And so that's the danger. But as you continue to grow, you actually realize, I can build a temple with this. Like, I can use this to add to what I know. And so they said, specifically the the Hebrews at the time were very good at that. They were very good at bringing in all of this foreign outside ideas and wisdom and incorporating it. And that is also the foundation of, in essence, of Western civilization, where it's founded on the Bible, but it incorporates Greek thinking and Islam, and all of these outside ideas have been brought in. All of this outside truth has been brought in and incorporated to create something even better, even stronger, even more holistic. It's like this bringing all truth into one whole, right? So I really feel like that is one of the reasons people are disengaging in church and religion, is because that's in some ways not allowed. It's not permitted to bring in these foreign ideas. And so people will begin to study outside ideas and foreign ideas, and maybe they'll even start reading Buddhist texts or Hinduism or whatever, which I've read all of those things, and it's great. There's truth to be found there. But then because they can't talk about this with anyone else, they don't know where to have these conversations.
Because they've been kind of either blatantly or kind of subconsciously taught that, where they are is the only source of truth, and you don't look for truth outside of that.
Right.
So then they go out and they find something that's true.
Yeah, Christianity is the only source of truth.
What? Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah.
And then they want to question
There's
everything.
truth in Buddhism and there's truth in Hinduism.
I was told that the only truth was in our little church.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but then because they don't have a place, like you were talking about, like where's a place to have these conversations, to have these discussions? There's nowhere for people to discuss this. And so they end up having to leave their own religion in search of a community where they can have these conversations, where they can say, hey, you know what? I've been reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I've been thinking about this, and I've been wondering, how does this play in, or does it play in, or is it a complete contradiction to Christianity, or what? We should be able to have those conversations instead of feeling like there's something wrong with you, or you're bad, or you're questioning, and so now you're on a path to hell. When the reality is, if we look at prophets and anyone who grows in their spiritual journey, that's just a normal part of it. That is the path. That's how you get there.
Right.
And we need to incorporate that into our religion so that it provides that foundation for walking the spiritual journey.
Gosh, and shouldn't it be like the best place?
Right.
It
should be.
On a Sunday, somebody walks in and says, I'm honestly questioning the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm struggling, wondering what's true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that should be the perfect place. You should walk in and everyone in the room should be like, yeah,
I've been there.
I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking? Let's talk through it. So, you need to have more faith. You're a sinner. Like, what do you, and shame, bad. Let me tell you how it is. Like, no, let's talk about it.
The devil is.
Yeah. Satan, let me cast out your devil. You're evil. It's like, no, I'm just doubting.
Right.
I'm wondering. Doubt's a great thing. Doubt is a great thing.
It is.
Because it can bring us to deeper, stronger truth.
Well, and I love this idea of wrestling with God, because in essence, that's what we should be doing. We should be having a wrestle with God. We should be struggling and trying to figure things out. And the metaphor of wrestling is great. Like there's kind of some confusion going on there, and some twisting and turning, and some pain even.
Some broken legs.
Yeah, because Jacob wrestled with God, and when he was done, he had a limp. Like he hurt himself and he was limping. And so, yes, sometimes that's going to be a part of the process. But I think because we're afraid of that journey, that wrestle, we shy away from it, and we instead prefer to remain comfortable with what we know, rather than embracing the unknown.
Right. Or we mistakenly think that, in order to be good and righteous, there's no wrestling.
There's no wrestling involved.
I just blindly, okay, yes,
right.
to anything.
Exact obedience.
And you become, that's not more righteous. Mm-mm. That's not more spiritual. That's more naive and more underdeveloped. Mm-hmm. That just blind acquiescence to anything. Like, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not even going to wrestle with it. I'm not going to question. I'm not going to try to understand it and really examine it. I'm okay, yes. That doesn't make you better. Mm-hmm. It makes you weaker.
Right.
And I know I'm there it is. I just shot another sacred cow. Because you think, no, the most righteous, the most spiritual, just they don't question anything.
They don't doubt.
There's no wrestling involved. It's just following along peaceably. And like, yeah, but you literally know nothing. And so when
Well, you remain underdeveloped, especially if, sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
well, just when you come face to face with something down your path, it's going to wreck you
Yes.
because you haven't examined it.
Because you're underdeveloped.
Yeah.
Because especially if we continue this metaphor, one of the very best things for the development of children is roughhousing and wrestling. Like that, the research on that is clear. Like children who wrestle with usually their fathers have just a much more developed brain. They have a much better grasp on the world, like not just the physical world, because that's a part of it, but even the social world. They learn boundaries about how to interact and like how far is too far and how much is too much pain. And like there's so much they're actually learning in that process that is helping with the development of their brain that I think is also happening with our wrestle with God. Like when we wrestle with God, we are learning more about ourselves. We're learning more about God. We're learning more about how things work. We're just understanding things better because we are having this wrestle with him.
Yep. And it makes us stronger, obviously.
Yeah.
Wrestling
absolutely
makes you stronger.
Right.
That's so simple.
So there's one other, I guess, viewpoint I want to put on this, because I remember hearing a few years ago, we were in Norway having an amazing experience on one of our trips. In fact, we had gone to visit the Sami people, who are indigenous people in Norway, and they're reindeer herders, right? And they have reindeer, and we got to feed the reindeer and take little reindeer rides, and it was like so cool. But I remember some friends of ours, they were talking, and they were talking about business, but I thought how applicable the metaphor they were using was to this idea that we had been developing about religion. And it was essentially this idea that anyone who in business who has created a successful business has had to fail at that. And I think the
Did
word,
they call it cycle?
yeah, I think the word that he used was cycling. Like you have to have cycled through, usually a couple of times, meaning you had to try to build something and then fail and then start again and fail again, you know. So you had to cycle in business in order for you to, one, be able to actually succeed on a big level, right? Some of the people couldn't even have a conversation with you about what you needed to do until you had cycled.
Right, exactly. And they didn't have the strength, the solidity. They hadn't been through the process.
They hadn't been through the process. Yeah. They hadn't walked the labyrinth, right? And I thought at the time, I'm like, that's exactly what has to happen with people in the church. Like in Christianity, unless you have cycled, unless you have gone through having some doubts and facing some of those fears and asking some of those scary questions and killing some of those sacred cows, it's almost like you can't really have a conversation with them because there are so many things that are off limits. Like you can't even bring it to the table because they will immediately be like, blasphemy or, apostasy. And I guess, I don't know what the point of bringing this up is, except that if more of us, I guess, are willing to cycle, we're willing to walk the labyrinth, we're willing to face the doubts, we're willing to go to the darkest place and seek truth, that then change can actually occur, right? Then change can begin. Then we can have more conversations, with people. And
I emphatically say, and have deeper faith, stronger faith,
absolutely,
a better, closer relationship with God, and better results.
Yeah.
And results don't lie.
Well, and be able to have some of those conversations about how to get better results in the organizations that we belong to, or in some cases even to focus on perhaps home church, home church supported by the church organization, but have it be home-centered, the point is to be able to have conversations about where do we go? How do we make this better? How do we create transformation? How do we create change? And that may look different for different people because, one of the things you've often pointed out is that if you look at contemporary prophets that were contemporary to each other, that they were often given completely opposite commands,
Yep.
right? Depending on the needs of the people. And so sometimes some of us will get one command or calling to do something a certain way, and others of us will get a different calling to do it a different way. Like maybe some of us will be called to get really involved in whatever church we're in, and some of us may be called to do church at home, or to not necessarily start our own church, but start your own branch or congregation or something, like just leading a certain group of people. Again, sacred cow, where
Right,
that
you're
just
like,
seems
"Ah!
like, scary.
What are you saying?
What are you talking about? But I
Well,
just feel that
we meet people. I want to share. Remember, a friend of ours, just like absolute pure salt of the earth, and we met him at this humanitarian organization, and then we went out to lunch with him, and he's like, "No, I want to go be a missionary for the next 50 years."
yes, yeah.
He's like, "I just want to go. I'm going to dedicate my whole life."
Well,
And-
but interestingly enough, he wanted to do it in like war-torn areas.
Yeah, hey, I want to go to the most devastated places on the planet, and I want to spend 50 years as a missionary for Christ. Mm-hmm. And Rachel, I was like,
Wow.
whoa. Like, okay, I spent a couple years, I thought it was amazing. But you want to spend your whole life, like, that's another level
Yeah.
of awesome. And the more you start getting out and meeting people and seeing what's possible, and it wasn't his specific congregation that was calling him to do it.
Right.
He felt
was individually
called as an individual
Right.
to dedicate his life to being a missionary. Mm-hmm. God was calling him. I'm like, okay, that's amazing,
Yeah.
and that's possible. And we keep meeting these wonderful people. Because I remember years ago, I thought, no, that's not possible. You can't like be off in isolation and become truly spiritual and righteous and
Right.
and be saved.
You have to be attending church
Yeah, right.
and, fulfilling your church calling.
Yeah. And you realize, wait a minute, there's people out like they're fulfilling a calling directly from God that puts the rest of us to shame.
Yeah.
Like our little Sunday check the boxes and like, oh, I took cookies over to the neighbor. I think I just got my ticket to heaven. And others are out there like doing the real work. And you're like, well, they just went on their own.
Right.
Anxiously engaged in a good cause of their own free will and choice.
Right.
Like, whoa, wait, what? That's another level of pure awesome sauce. Okay, if you listen to this all the way to the end, wow. Wow. Okay, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for thinking about this. Let's all move towards greater faith, better, closer, stronger relationship with God, and examine how we can help things be better, how we can question things and encourage improvement across the board so that we can help let our light so shine before the world that they can see our good works and glorify God. That's also a commitment. But that's the goal, to shine. So, love you guys. Thanks for listening. Reach upward.